Hi, and welcome to my weekly review of what I've learned. Um, Today we are going to be talking about 5 points. If you're if you see anything that you find interesting, don't be afraid to leave a comment down below. And let's go ahead and get started on my first point. Okay, point number one. I learned. So I knew about the Iranian hostage crisis in 1979, 1980. I kind of know the global and the effect it had on the United States. I know the effect it had on President Jimmy Carter's presidency and how it kind of encouraged the voting in of Ronald Reagan. But I did not know really much about, didn't know much of the details about the raid itself. And that was not until I've read Delta Force by Colonel Beckwith, basically the founder of the Special Ops Unit. And he talks about how when the hostage situation happened, the army looked towards him finally, and they planned for months. Actually, it wasn't like a on the whim. Let's just go ahead and send them in. I want to say they started planning on the raid in late or mid 1979. Basically, as soon as the hostage situation started, but they didn't act on it until late winter of 1980. And he also talks about how, despite all the planning, which they really came up with some complicated strategies on how getting into Tehran, going through the country itself, because they were literally starting from the ocean. They couldn't just start from Kuwait, which was right there, or they couldn't start from Turkey. They had to literally go across all of the country, because Tehran is the capital of Iran, is in the middle of the country itself. And a few of the points, one was apparently since the helicopters they were using didn't have the fuel capacity to reach Tehran from the ocean, they literally had to drop fuel tanks, airdrop them into the partway point. Let me see if I can. Let me see. Here. There's the example. See the point. This one here. Nope. This one right here. That's where they drop the oil at, or the gasoline for the helicopters. And they did two things also. They decided to use C-130s to drop the Delta Force there, so they would meet the helicopters there instead of just flying in from the beginning with the helicopters. Another point they didn't take into effect was the fact that the helicopters were going to be shipped on the I want to say the USS Nimitz. I forget the name of the ship. I want to say the Nimitz. They shipped off from the country, from the U.S. on there, since the Nimitz was going out to patrol that region anyways. But they didn't really take into effect that the Nimitz crew wouldn't know how to handle those helicopters. They wouldn't know how to fix them, how to prepare them. Didn't really know what they were preparing them for. They just knew they were just carrying them. Another thing that happened was they did not take in effect weather, and the weather that hit really bad, which really caused the mission to flounder, was a sandstorm that the helicopters ended up flying through. Two ended up landing. There were 6 helicopters. They took 6 because they didn't think they were going to be reliable. They figured if, I think, 4 make it there. I think they needed that many because they were sending in 90 Special Forces soldiers. So they needed to carry like They needed 4 or 5 helicopters to actually do the job, which is nuts. And the whole point of so the helicopters go out there. 2 of them are missing because due to getting lost in the no, not lost. One literally was breaking apart because it wasn't maintained on the ship, so they had to land. The others made it to the point, but they were like 5 hours late. The Delta Force guys wanted to get to Tehran at night, but they would end up going there in like not early morning hours, but like daybreak, so they'd be seen during the day. It was a calamity. I was reading this, it was kind of like, wow, this went wrong so badly. At least, like, no one was really seriously killed, from what I read, or seriously wounded, but, or maybe, I can't remember. I finished the book last weekend, I think. Sorry, but so they decided to abort because they didn't have enough helicopters. They reached Tehran, and so first they were going to fly back on helicopters after they filled up, and then that was aborted, but too late because the one helicopter pilot, when he went to go lift off to get away from the fuel tank, he lost his helicopter broke on him, and then he literally crashed into one of the C-130s. Yeah, I guess you could say they learned a lot. The U.S. Special Forces learned a lot from this, and you could see the effect in like the Osama bin Laden raid. Like, what would it be, like 30 years later? So I learned a lot about the raid. I didn't know much about it. I know it failed, and that kind of impacted the course of American history. So let's go ahead and get to my next point. Next point comes from try to get I have my information on it, but The Last Great Strike by Ahmed White. I think I was reading it last time when we did the last episode, and it is kind of a slow book. I'm not gonna lie. When I get to the review, I might bring that up. But there's a lot of information, though. I'll give it that. I'm learning a lot from it. It's just I just find myself reading like 10 or 20 pages a day, which I gotta pick it up because it's gonna be due in like 9 days. But that said, one of the things that the author brings up, and that is the anti-union tactics of these companies. And I gotta admit, it is very interesting how far these companies were able to get in terms of what's the word? Their rights. They were literally infringing on the workers' rights to protest. So you could argue they were interfering when the protesters were outside the gate, which, to be fair, unless they were literally on property of the company, I don't see that argument really being in effect. How far out does the property go before it's public property? And in this case, a lot of times, I don't know. The author doesn't really say that, but the question is, why are they stopping their right to protest? And then, I'm not a communist, but when the communist individuals that were involved in the unions would go about trying to get workers to join the union, the companies would deliberately attack these people and physically, and also stalk them, send send company police. They would have their own police forces. They would send them to go spy on these union agitators. And again, it's kind of surprising. It's quite frankly could be considered oppressive. Love or hate communism. Just pretend to leave communism part out of it, and just say it's workers trying to improve their life stance and banding together to try to convince a company to give them better rights, give them better pay, better life quality. And the companies literally would, in some cases, for example, the author brings up, I forget her first name, Perkins. She was the Secretary of Labor under Franklin Roosevelt, and she was very extremely into labor unions. But she tried having a speech with the deputy governor of Pennsylvania at one of the Republic steel, like at one of the towns, and I guess it was one of those steel towns where company towns where the bosses were quite able to say, yeah, no, you're not even going to speak here. They forbid them to speak. They were going to speak at a local park, and it's nuts. The company said no, and so they had to actually go to a local mail office. The mail is federalized, so they couldn't be kicked out of there. But again, that is an infringement on free speech. I understand, like, I know some places do require you to get permits, but I don't know. It's definitely looks. If it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it must be a duck. And in this case, it looks like they're extremely infringement on the First Amendment rights of these workers and people who wanted to support the workers. So, I guess the lesson here is be wary of big business because they might just absolutely infringe on your rights. Government assistance or not, whoever the government's assisting or staying neutral. And in this case also, I forgot to mention, was even the local police, like in my town, Youngstown, which was one of the cities involved in this strike. There was multiple cities. Local Youngstown police would absolutely harass and in a way, and sometimes assault these protesters and these organizers. And again, I know if you're anti-communist, and I'm anti-communist too, but I am pro-union, if that makes sense. I understand a union, but I think communism should stay out of it. All it does is dirty the process. I'm letting my political views get out here, but that's fine. Some of my political views, anyways. What was I gonna say? Yeah, so I didn't ask in the last point. Leave a comment down below what you think of the Iranian hostage crisis, if you know anything about that, and if you interested in unions and strikes and steel mills. If you live in a Rust Belt city and you're aware of the protests, leave a comment down below. Rust Belt city, for those that don't know, is in the United States. There's literally like a geographical area where cities that used to be big steel producing cities or towns, quite frankly, just dried up because the steel mills closed. And it's called the Rust Belt. And it's like a line of cities, or like a region like the Rust Belt region. It's just like there's a Sun Belt region, I think it. So, okay, so let's get to my next point. So I don't know YouTube's policies on talking about the Confederacy, but I'm not trying to promote the Confederacy. I'm reading The Demon of Unrest by Erik Larson. He's a good author. I've read, so far this is my third book of his I've read. I like Deadwake a lot. It's somewhere. And I've read what's it, the one about the U.S. Ambassador to Berlin in 1930. I read that. That one was not really my taste. I prefer Deadwake more, if anyone asks. So far, I'm liking this one a lot too. Demon of Unrest talks about the lead up to the Civil War and the secession of the southern states. And in this point, I thought was interesting. I think there is a value of trying to think how the other team thinks. Because I'm pro union, I'm pro let's stay together, ban slavery, great. And then, you know, back then I'd probably be a Yankee, right? But in this case, not in this case. This case, I'm still a Yankee, right? But you kind of got to try to see where the other side is coming from. And the author brings up a great point, and that is, in a way, by the way, there was like a noble class in the southern states. There still kind of is, right? But like the slave owners, the big plantation owners, they're kind of the nobles. They would act like they're the bosses of the whole region, and naturally were pro-slavery. One of the things that I thought was interesting, again, was why they were so up in arms about the pro-slavery thing, and that is, in a way, Western society, and I don't just mean the North, the Union, but also European nations that banned slavery. To them, the South was looking like the villain. Like, hey, can you stop with the slavery everyone else has? Why are you still, why are you still selling and buying and using people against their will? And the Southern nobles, I like to call them, Eric calls them chivalry, the chivalry crowd. The nobles were like, hey, why are you so? It's an interesting point. I don't believe in over villainifying someone unless they really deserve it. Like those bad guys in Germany in the 1940s, those guys were bad. They deserve to be called villains. But if someone I disagree with politically, I try to avoid calling them a villain. That said, of course, Confederacy was kind of the villain, were the villains in this situation, but they were having a hard time accepting that. What do you mean we're bad for having slaves? And they would try to defend slavery every chance they got to try to prove that they were the good guys after all. Like, hey, but it's not that bad, you know? and it's like, excuse me? Yeah. And secession and Civil War and all these thoughts, especially today, you hear about it. Like I was just reading an article about California being the governor there, and then like I guess people on there, there was news on Twitter. The governor said something about protecting the rights of Californians, which is fine. And then some guy, I'm guessing right-leaning, was just like, why don't you just secede already? Meanwhile, here's me like, hey, don't say that. No secession is allowed. We're united till we die. We all, I don't know, that's my mentality, but yeah, you could tell, if I was around 1860, 1850, I'd be like, nope, we're a United States. Listen up, you're not a country, you're a state. South Carolina, Georgia, Missouri. You're not countries, you're states. So stop acting. I don't know. We're all American in the end. Leave it at that. That's how my mentality is when I'm reading this book. Oh, and also screw slavery. Hashtag end slavery. That's what I've been saying on Twitter. I don't know. I don't see many people hashtagging that. Okay, so let's get to my second point because I ranted enough. So, my next point comes from Demon of Unrest. I have 3 points about it from it. I'm learning a lot. I think if I check my Goodreads keeps track of your highlights with Kindle books, and I have 52 highlights. I know that's including my bookmark, but pull back OBS back up so I can make sure nothing breaks there. But yeah, 52 highlights, and one of the main characters of this story is Major Anderson. I forget his first name. For the life of me, I didn't think of keeping that as a note. Whoops. Anyways, I've been reading as the book proceeds. I'm reading about him, and I don't know why. At first, I kind of hated his guts. Like, dude, leave that honor stuff at the door. These people are literally prepared to fire upon you. Talking about the the Charleston population and the South Carolina militia are literally like 3 hours away from shooting at you, and you want to be and it's like, I haven't gotten to that point yet. Maybe their spies just figured out, but like somehow the South Carolinians knew that the Fort Sumter was low on food. Major Anderson was in charge of Fort Sumter. Fort Sumter being the fort outside of on the Charleston Bay, and basically this was the last federal land in the Confederacy, or at least highly disputed land. The Confederates wanted the Union soldiers off the island, and they wanted to, they didn't like the idea of a fort with guns being right in the middle of their bay. But again, it's like back to that secession talk. Like, if California were to secede, would the United States keep all its land that it owns in California, or would they give it to California? I don't know. That'd be an interesting thought. Like, I don't want the secession, but if it did, like, would the United States keep all its bases in San Francisco? Would it keep its bases in San Diego? If California tried to take those by force, would the U.S. respond with force? I don't know. But in this case, that's kind of what's happening. And again, Anderson is kind of like, Anderson himself is a Southerner. He came from Kentucky. He emotionally supports the South. He's actually like, yeah, I'm one of you. Meanwhile, he's like, oh, and I'm also a U.S. soldier, so I gotta fight for the Union to the death because that's my honor to do so. But again, it's like, are you okay? This is kind of one of those scenarios where you have to pick a side. You don't want to think like the country breaking up and us all having to pick a side. We'd rather just stay neutral and try to keep the peace. In this case, the peace, they're literally about to shoot at you in 3 hours. So I don't know. I don't know if you want to keep sitting on that fence. And in a way, him sitting on that fence is really what's putting his men in danger, in a sense, because his men are under his command, of course. So if he decides to fight back or not, it's going to result with them. What happens to them? How do they get captured or killed? I'm not sure yet. I'm only on page 220, so I don't really know what happens to Fort Sumter. I just know it gets attacked, because that's as much far as I know about the Civil War. I know the broad story, but I don't know the compact. I don't know the ins and outs like I do World War II. I want to. I'm going to do a lot of research this coming year, because of research for a novel I want to write. Quick little plug, if you want to read my novel, Black Monday, here's a cover here. It's called Black Monday. It's on Amazon, and the link to the description is in. The link is in the description. God, I'm tired. I don't know. I waited too long to film this. I should have filmed it a lot earlier, but I was too busy. I didn't want to interrupt some editing I had to do for the podcast going up tomorrow. By the way, if you want to learn a little bit about education, get my professor, who's an education professor's point of view on education. Check it out. I'll also be putting up some clips throughout the week if you don't have the attention span. Anyways, like I said, Anderson, like, he does some brave things. I'm like, yeah. You like get in that Alamo mentality. Like, listen, you could attack us, and a lot of you are gonna go with us to heaven or hell. But then other times he's like, there's a point in the story while Buchanan was still president. I forget the name of the ship. I always forget stuff, but the name of the ship that was kind of sent to reinforce / resupply Fort Sumter as it was entering the bay. Confederate South Carolina militia fired upon the ship, which donned the American flag. The ship itself was unarmed, and they were not firing back to defend itself. And instead of going to the aid of the ship, Anderson thought, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and not attack. I don't want to start something here, even though it's kind of already started. Your teammates, your Team Blue, remember, but your teammates are literally getting shot at right now. And you're just sitting there watching and not trying to get involved with your cannons. And he goes to his boss, the Secretary of War. The one beforehand was a traitor, basically, and he was trying to get Fort Sumter to be handed over to the Confederacy. Well, this guy was like, yeah, I'm happy that you had restraint and you don't want to cause war, but hey, the American flag and your fellow servicemen were just attacked in front of you, and all you did was sit there and watch, and you had the capability to retaliate, at least to give the ship some cover to leave or to resupply you. You did neither. You just sat there and watched. What the South Carolina, and he even went to the point of sending an emissary. Anderson did. He sent an emissary to the governor of South Carolina, and he was like, "Hey, did you do that on purpose? That shooting, or are you going to take responsibility for that, or were you? Or the reason why I didn't shoot because I just don't think you gave the order." And it's okay, Major Anderson. I don't know when Andersonville becomes bad, and I don't know if I don't even think Andersonville is built yet. If you don't know what Andersonville was, it was the POW camp, the the Confederacy had for Union soldiers, captured Union soldiers, and it was quite bad there. If you can imagine, if the Confederacy was low on supplies, feeding their soldiers, imagine how naturally they want to feed their civilians. Think the totem pole, and then all the way at the bottom is the POWs. So it's like, if the supplies aren't there, they're not getting fed. Now, obviously, early on in the war, maybe Andersonville wasn't that bad, but I don't know what happens with Fort Sumter. I'm going to find out, of course. So, another point that's brought up in this book, and something I was curious about, and that's not really thought up that much, is when I say the United States, I mean both Southern and North here. The population of America at the time was only 49 million people. Now, those you don't know, the United States now has a population of 350 million people. And so when I hear about a civil war, I'm thinking, first off, the population's got to be even, right? Like, there's got to be, I don't know. Maybe I had a kind of an idea due to immigration that the North was more populated, but not to this extreme. Like, he talks about the capital of um, South Carolina called Columbia, and how it only had a population of 8,000 people, and that's like insane for a capital of a state. Like today, that's small town levels of population right there, and that's not even a small town. Small town is like, I don't know, 30,000 plus. I'm a 30,000 plus. Uh, Small town is like, I don't know. Once you get into them 5 digits is when you're leaving small town levels. So maybe it is a small town or a village. But it is insane to think about. And then on to like 6,000 people, 600,000 Americans will die in this war. Rather you're pro Confederacy or pro Union. I know some people were pro Confederacy. Don't ask me why, but I guess the whole rebellion mentality of it. But um, don't get me wrong. Rebellion mentality is cool. I just don't really care about comparing it to Confederacy. Like Stone Cold Steve Austin, right? That's the rebel mentality. But I wouldn't associate Steve Austin with slavery, right? So, um, yeah, but 40 something thousand, 4,000 something, 40 million people is not that many. I don't know what the population of the rest of the like European countries or yeah, like England and Germany at this time. I'd have to Google and check. But well, let's go let's go and wrap this up. All right. So, hopefully you enjoyed my 5 things that I thought were interesting that I learned this previous week. If you enjoyed, please consider leaving a like and comment down below. And if you want to subscribe, I recommend doing so. I'll let you know when new content comes out. Also hit that bell, that notification bell. And if you want to keep track of what I'm doing, I recommend following me on X. I want to call it Twitter. It's like, I'm not being rebellious or political when I call it Twitter. It's just, I'm just used to calling it Twitter. And also, maybe it is a little bit of rebellion just because, like 2 examples, I don't even know what it's called now, but Sears Tower in Chicago. I've been there. I know Chicagoans just call it Sears Tower. But it's like, yeah, I'm not going to call it a different name, especially if it's going to change every 10 years. I'm just going to call it what it's traditionally called, right? So, and then like personally, Youngstown, we have a, we have a, we don't have skyscrapers like big cities, but we have tall buildings. And one of our buildings was called Home Savings, and has a big clock tower on the top of it. And it got changed. It was the Premier Bank, and now I guess they're changing it to something else now. But it's like, no, 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 no. It's a home savings building. Come on now. You can't force me to say something different. I'm calling it what it is. But so if you want to follow me on X, Twitter, if you want to follow me to see what I'm reading, I recommend following me on Goodreads. And again, the book description my novel's description will be in the link below. And I will talk to you guys tomorrow during the podcast. Or I talk to you sometimes during the podcast. Right. Anyways, I'll talk to you guys then. Stay safe, live your life, learn something, pick up a book. Don't let me be the only one reading and sharing my thoughts on this channel. But I will say bye bye.